Hi there, I'm Victoria, and this is Beanie, who is Kitty's brother. And this week I'd like to talk about the poem which caught my attention, which is the one that actually Professor Hamilton began to read out and analyze at about 15:55 of this week's lecture, which was a poem by Simon J Ortiz called Becoming Human. This one stood out to me because of one, my personal experience, my personal journey throughout my adult life, trying to figure out what it means to be a human and have human experiences as I try to make sense of my various traumas and adventures. And two, because of the book which I read last semester called Why Indigenous Literature Matters by Daniel Heath Justice, and particularly the chapter called How Do We Learn to Be Human? In both reflections, the answer is our connection to each other. Justice writes, in those indigenous cultural understandings that have withstood such colonial intrusions, the status of human is intimately embedded in kinship relations. It's why some version of the question, who is your family, or who are your people, continue to be so important in Indigenous conversations. Such questions don't just connect you to a lineage, however that may be understood. They place you in a meaningful context with your diverse relatives and the associated relationships of obligation, where you have people who claim you and who have hopefully trained you well in the ways of being a good human being. This seems to be in alignment with Professor Hamilton's assessment of Ortiz's poem at 19 minutes, as he confirms that the I comes from the communal form. And he further describes that we come into our full being, fully free, when we identify within a community and we see that we are not alone, as stated at 20 minutes and 50 seconds. So this concept of the human being initially feels in contrast of Simon J Ortiz's other poem, Blind Curse. I do enjoy the imagery that he evokes when he says, words fly away, tumbling invisibly toward the unseen point where the prairie and sky meet, as well as explaining the blind white side of creation, which I imagine a white void before existence is formed. But then he goes further to say, you're there somewhere, a tiny struggling cell. You just might be significant, but you might not be anything. Which this diction for me carried an emphasis of loneliness and meaningless, a hopeless moment of existence or an existential breath. But then the imagery returns as his curse flies out there somewhere, and he returns to his identity and community as he sends his prayer for the truck headed to Sioux Falls. His form of the single lonely cell, once again, joined into the community of cells which make up his form as a human being.